for coming out to our group author reading. This reading is brought to you by Strong Women's Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and other underrepresented gender identity authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through our events like our bi-monthly virtual quick read sessions. You can find out more about Strong Women's Strange Worlds through the handout we'll provide in the chat and by visiting our website, a link of which we will throw up in the chat, and it's strongwomenstrangeworlds.weebly.com. Today, we will be featuring 6 authors: Kathryn Sullivan, Sarah Smith, Elaine Pascale, F. Deal, Elaine Isaak, and Anne E. G. Nydam. Each author will have 8 minutes to read. And before we get started, we'd also like to thank Cari Lynn Jones, a former member of the organizing committee, who's back today to help us backstage so that current committee members can read to you today. Thank you, Cari. Our first reader is Kathryn Sullivan. Kathryn Sullivan writes stories where girls are the explorers, the wizards, and the ones who solve problems and rescue people. She helps recruit authors and audience for Strong Women's Strange Worlds. Kathryn, take it away.
Thanks. I'll be reading from Talking to Trees, starting with the first chapter. Chapter 1, Jody. Jody Burns saw the green-haired girl step out of midair. At first, she didn't realize she'd seen anything unusual. This was the mall on Saturday, after all. But then it struck her that this couldn't possibly be some advertising trick. The girl hadn't been there a second ago. The air had suddenly rippled, and she'd stumbled through. She was dripping wet, her hair and clothing clinging to her. She looked as if she'd been crying, and Jody could hear half sniff, half sob as she glanced around at the crowded mall. The girl shook her head, and Jody expected to see droplets of water fly everywhere. Instead, she only heard a faint rustle, and the short hair suddenly looked dry, lightening to sea green color. The water beading the girl's light brown skin and soaking her shirt vanished as if absorbed. The girl hugged her bare arms below the short sleeves and looked around as if she was searching for someone. Jody quickly looked back at the window display before her. Summer pastels were such a relief after the gray winter drabs. She said as much to Amy Evans, but Amy was looking elsewhere. Well, check out the new style. Ew, seaweed, Brittany commented. Jody turned with the rest of the group. The green-haired girl was heading directly for them. She wore a loose, almost knee-length, brownish smock and dark brown leggings. The smock had a pattern that reminded Jody of the paneling in the family room, light and dark wood-grain swirls, and the neck and the slim sleeve trim even resembled bark. Close up, her brown skin seemed to have greenish undertones. I wonder if she's ill, a small thought began before Jody crushed it. The girl stopped before them. Small beaded cords that held short tufts of hair at each temple clattered softly as she bobbed her head. Excuse, please. Do you know where dwells a hero? Hero? Amy echoed. Or a wizard. A demon slayer would be best. Jody wondered why the girl was looking at her. Maybe it was because she was the tallest of the group of 12 and 13-year-olds. She knew she was dressed more in fashion than the others, but then the city stores she used to shop in were much better than those in small-town malls. She seems about her age, too old to be playing little kid games. You mean the Slayer? Brittany asked, emphasizing the name. Someone obviously watches too much television, she added to the group. Weird, Sadie commented. She made a circling gesture by her temple, and the others giggled. The girl looked from one to the other and finally returned her attention to Jody. Please, I need help. Definitely, Amy agreed. For one, that hair color is so out. Out where? She seemed puzzled, and several of the girls laughed. Jody actually thought the girl's hair color was interesting. Seafoam, she thought the shade might be called. She tried to remember if she had seen any outfits in that color. It would definitely suit her blonde looks. Unnervingly, the girl focused on her again. Please, we've held back the evil as long as we can. We need help. Why was she asking her? Jody looked around. Weren't there any security guards in this mall? She settled for an older teen or an adult if she could get anyone's attention. but everybody seemed to be in a hurry, walking past around the group of girls. And that outfit, Amy tissed. Long baggy shirts are so yesterday. The girl tilted her head as she looked at them. I don't understand your words. The watcher of gates said the first person who saw me would be the one to help. She looked again at Jody, who tried not to squirm. Will you help? Yes, Jody, Amy said with an unfriendly smile and a glance aside at the other girls. Will you help? Jody could feel the others watching her as they waited. Somehow it felt as if everyone in the mall was watching her. This girl might be serious about asking for help, but what could she do? Better to make a big joke of it, as the rest were, and go back to window shopping. Jody opened her mouth to speak, and suddenly felt overwhelmingly bored. So bored, I want to walk away. I'm bored, Amy said. She turned and walked away. The rest of the girls followed. Jody started to turn as well, but her brown hand closed about her wrist. The green-haired girl looked closely at her. Will you help? She repeated. Jody looked down at the hand around her wrist, just above the silver bracelet. She was so bored. She should leave now, and yet there was something odd about that grip around her wrist. She felt as if there were two voices in her head, one demanding go and the other stay. Hey, Jody! Jody looked up to see Jeannie Tucker, her brother's friend, coming toward them. She really should leave. Amy and the other girls were already several stores away. Jeannie Tucker was not one of the popular crowd and never followed the trends. For example, as usual, the dark-haired girl was wearing jeans and a plain sweatshirt, more suited to a barn than the mall. Fashion disaster. Amy always said Jeannie Tucker was odd, that she had powers. Jody vaguely remembered something strange about Jeannie last October, something about her spotted horse in a tree. But there was someone holding her wrist. Jeannie Tucker looked at Jody, at her wrist being held by the green-haired girl, then finally at the green-haired girl. Yes, she said thoughtfully. I thought I sensed. She looked closer at the green-haired girl and smiled. The strange girl smiled hesitantly in return. But you're not a dryad, are you? Jeannie continued. No, the girl said slowly. My ancestor was human. Jody's boredom vanished as if it had been switched off. What had she said? And I'll stop here. This is Talking to Trees. Thank you so much.
That was so good. I feel like I spent the last minute going, help her, help her, help her. I can't wait to find out what's happening next. Our second reader today is Sarah Smith. International bestseller Sarah Smith's books are published in 15 languages. She's won the Agatha Award for Best Teenage Mystery, the Massachusetts Book Award for Best Teenage Novel, and numerous other honors, including New York Times notable and various Best Book of the Year lists. She's working on a fantasy with pirates and talking eagles and is delighted by the number of characters she can kill. She lives near Boston, and her Strong Women Strange Worlds job is emceeing the Thursday night readings. Sarah, take it over.
Thank you, Kate. This is from Crimes and Survivors, and it's one of several times Titanic sinks. One of them's part of a movie, but this is the real thing. Our heroine, Perdita, is trying to get Dr. John Church to tell her a family secret her life depends on. And all he has to say is yes, one word, yes. But instead, he throws her into the last lifeboat. Perdita is suddenly grabbed around the waist and swung out into air with nothing under her feet. She bicycles, trying to find a foothold. She's falling. She lands with a jar, bites her tongue, tastes blood. Her boots splash into water. The boat jerks downward. They hit the water too soon. The lights of Titanic hang over them. Someone guides her hands onto something large and heavy, a lug, an oar. A sailor shouts, "Row, row, fast as you can, ladies. We gotta get away. Pull, pull." All the women are pulling frantically at the oars. They tug and push against each other. It is so cold. The icy air sucks the breath out of them, even though they're packed tight in the boat. Pull, ladies! Above them, Titanic dazzles. Her lights touch the water, and underwater the sea glows green. She has to go back. Dr. John is still up on deck and hasn't heard her yes. Above her head, a violin leads a slow, sweet, heartbreaking melody. She can hear individual voices. A man says, "Bless you," and a woman is crying. Someone's preaching, and there was no more sea. She listens for Dr. John's voice saying yes, and then Titanic flickers and dims to red-orange. Metal screeches. A heavy wave tosses the lifeboat. The women cry out. They're still so close to the ship. The musicians stop playing raggedly in surprised off-key wavers. Hundreds of voices call out. People begin to scream, "Pull, ladies!" And the song of Titanic goes out. And the whole world is dark. Row! Row! She's going! It's dark, but she can hear. Metal moans. A man calls out, "Mama, help me." The telegraph wire pings, whines, whips through the air. The ship shrieks. Huge things roll and tumble, thump and smash, and windows shatter. Every pane vents, and over again. There are thuds around her, like hammers hitting water. Groan like an enormous beast makes the sea tremble. "Got 'em! Look at her stern! It's going up! Row! Row! Bugger you, ladies! Row!" The lifeboat is pulled backward towards the ship as if by a tide. People are screaming, the living and the dying screaming together, men and women, and she's still listening for Dr. John as if he might call one word, yes. "Hold for your life! Row! Row!" And then she realizes what she's hearing. "Mom! Mommy, help!" There are children in the water. Purita pulls her gloves off her hands and puts her hands against the oar to try to stop the boat from rowing away, but there are too many people rowing. She only bumps up against them. She thrusts her hands over the side to try to stop and puts her hands against the oar to try to stop the boat from rowing away, but there are too many people rowing. She gropes her hands in the water as if one child might be close enough to pull in the boat. She gropes for one drowning hand, Dr. John, her past, her future, anyone, one hand to grasp hers and be saved. The freezing sea tugs her downward. The oar smashes against her shoulder. Her skin goes numb in seconds. It feels as if her hands are being crushed. She has to pull her hands out of the water, moaning. And it is too late. When Titanic sinks, 700 people, here 1,500 people die. Some jump from the ship and are killed instantly, smashing into the water as if they were hitting pavement. Some are sucked down, but over 1,000 people who were on Titanic float alive in the water. Husbands, brothers, sisters, children, for 5 minutes, 10, 20, they are held up by their crew life jackets, unable to drown. They freeze by inches. They scream in pain. They cry for help. They pray. The survivors know their voices, and the survivors have to listen. The survivors huddle in the boats. They jam their fingers in their ears to keep out the screams. In one boat, the men tell the women that the screams are cheers because everyone is safe. In another, they sing a hymn to drown out the cries. Slowly, One by one, the voices from the river die away. Plugged ears cannot keep out silence. The survivors strain to hear familiar voices. They yearn to hear anything. And it is dark. And it is silent, except for the oars slapping the water. The people rowing to keep warm, rowing to have some sound in their ears, a splash, an oarlap groaning, anything but silence. A splash, a murmur, the sound of human life, even a scream. To hear a scream again, anything but silence and the voices only they can hear, voices whispering to them, last cries, help me, help me, don't leave me. How many people die on Titanic? How many voices cry out and then go silent in that hour, in that sea? Long years later, Renee Harris, who lost her husband that night, will be introduced to a completely clueless woman as Mrs. Harris, who was on Titanic. The clueless woman will ask, "And did you survive?" Renee Harris will think for much longer than the question warrants. No. And that's a bit from Crimes and Survivors. Thank you.
Well, I think I speak for just about everyone when I tell you that it's hard. I was honestly tearing up in that. That was so well written.
Thank you.
All right, our third reader is Elaine Pascale. Elaine Pascale is the author of The Bloodlights, If Nothing Else, Eve. We've enjoyed the fruit and the language of crows. She is the co-editor of Dancing in the Shadows, a tribute to Anne Rice, and a regular contributor to The Pen of the Damned and The Ladies of Horror. When not writing, Elaine can be found on her paddleboard. For Strong Women's Strange Worlds, she invites authors to participate in readings. Elaine, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm the first Elaine of the day, and I'm going to be skipping around on a story called The Middle from the upcoming anthology, Anterior Skies. And this may be the very first horror paddleboard story. The Middle. See where those boats are? You want to hug the coast over there. Don't go toward the middle. Just keep hugging the coast. The man at the rental shack winked as he pocketed their signed waivers. Legend is, people don't come back from the middle. Is there an undertow? Kara asked as she grabbed a paddle from the rack. The man squinted and looked to the area he had just been mentioning. Nope, nothing like that. Brett mumbled to his wife as they were strapping the paddleboard leashes to their ankles. He's just trying to scare us away from the best spots. Probably the best fishing or something. That's what locals do to tourists. We aren't fishing. Doesn't matter. They want to keep the best stuff for themselves. Kara picked up her board and moved to the opening. I suggest we listen to him. I had that feeling, remember? And then that dream. Brett hoisted his board and followed her. I refuse to check under the bed for any of those monsters you dream about. I never make you check. Her eyes turned angry, and he could see her revisiting the times that she had needed him, and he had disappointed her. Not that I'd mind checking, he added sheepishly. He saw her shiver despite the warmth of the water she'd walked into. And it felt so real, though, in that growl. I could still hear it after I woke up. I understand it upset you, honey, he said, using words he'd recently been trained to use. Let's try to enjoy our day, though. He walked a few steps past her before getting on his board. He had always liked to lead their trips. He was stronger, and if they stumbled upon a ripcord or other misfortune, he believed he'd be able to work his way out of it and warn her, if not rescue her. Until recently, he believed that as long as he was in charge, everything would be okay. Despite the hits that belief had taken, he still wanted to be the one to test the waters first. As her husband, it was the least he could do. Hug the shore, she called him. He nodded and waited for her to follow. The day was warm and the water was like glass. Brett and Kara were able to skate along at a speed and ease they rarely experienced. "This is paradise," Brett mumbled, almost afraid to say it out loud. Kara interpreted her dreams religiously, and he had developed compulsive beliefs of his own. Kara had heard a monster in her dreams. He saw monsters behind every promise. A boat zigzagged along the channel, trying to either throw or excite the people laying on the large tube that had been tethered to the back. The boat driver was behaving recklessly, and Brett knew a thing or two about bad choices. Kara called up to him to stand down. She was referring to his temper, which had gotten them in trouble before. She had also made him promise that they would have a good day. His transgression was never completely behind them, but they could smile and laugh and try to act as if they hadn't a care in the world. He had promised her a good day. It had been the least he could do, even though he knew what was behind every promise. He had truly thought he loved Tanya. He had convinced himself that his unhappiness had been Kara's fault. He had convinced himself that she had needed too much from him, too much of him. With Tanya, it had been easy, excitement and passion, even though it had been very brief, even though it had destroyed his life. "Let me know if you needed anything or want to stop and drift for a bit," he called back to Kara. He had always taken care of Kara. When they had unexpectedly become parents, he had taken care of all of them. He had blamed Kara for the pregnancy, even though they had both been equally surprised. She had been on birth control and it had always worked. Yet he felt like she had trapped him. Their friends had been settling down and getting married and starting families, and he had believed she had manipulated him. He had gone along with everything to a point. The wedding, the new house, the family life. Eventually, the lack of control had gotten to him. It had taken some time and some therapy, but he had learned to accept accountability. He had made a mistake. He'd been selfish, and it had cost him financially, personally, and professionally. It would be inaccurate to say that Kara's family had disowned her for his transgressions, but they had stopped visiting. They no longer called her or included her in events if it meant that he was part of the package. It was also inaccurate to say that he had lost his job, but it had become impossible to work at a place where so many people could no longer look him in the eye because of what they had seen. "Honey," Kara's voice had a nervous tone, "something feels off about my board." They moved closer to the mangroves and sat down on the boards. Brett thought that he was wearing his best poker face, but Kara was sensing something different. When he asked if she were holding the paddle correctly, she became angry. "Of course I am, and it's not the paddle, it's the board. I know what it's supposed to feel like, and this feels wrong. Please don't act as if I'm a newbie or can't handle the board." She had been the one to introduce him to paddleboarding, but somewhere along the line, he had taken the role of leader. There's a drag. It's like something's pulling it from beneath, hanging on and weighing it down. "Let me see." Brett lowered himself into the water and waded to Kara's board. As he was feeling around underneath, something caught, like a fishing line. The boat with the tubers being towed made another pass. They were dangerously close this time, and Brett could see the bodies on the tube belonged to young kids who laughed raucously as the wake nearly shook them loose. The wake also rocked Brett and Kara. Brett ended up with a mouthful of water. "They're going to get someone killed," he said after he finished coughing. "There always has to be at least one asshole," Kara agreed. Brett pointed to the other side of the channel. "There's no one over there. And look at how the water's so still. There's no current." She shook her head, the extended brim of her hat punctuating the motion. "We can't cross over," that man said. "We can go fast, really book it through the middle." "Brett, listen to me." She'd been saying that a lot lately, like when she had protested moving back in with his parents as a means to attack the debt they had accrued. Like when she pleaded with him to ignore the company that had promised to recover both the video and the stolen money. Kara had said it was too late. She'd already seen the video, and that was all that mattered. She had smelled another scam. He hadn't listened to any of those petitions, but he would listen this time. It was the least that he could do. The sun had become unforgiving. The boats were keeping to the shallows and rocking the couple with waves so that standing on the board had become an acrobatic feat. Brett felt his paddle knocking against the compact sand on the floor of the ocean. "The tide's really dropping out on us. Should we head back?" He looked over his shoulder to see her frown. "It's okay. We can keep going. I just don't think it's going to work here. It's a struggle when it's this shallow. It's deeper over there." He pointed to the center. "Brett, that man said not to go there." He tried a different tactic. "I bet we see dolphins or at least big fish out there." "Brett." He was growing tired of hearing her repeated argument, but therapy had taught him to listen. It had also taught him to realize that his wants were not always of primary importance and that his perception was sometimes off. I still feel that tug, she said. It's so weird. It's not the current. It's pulling in the opposite direction of the current. Do you want to stop again? No, I want to have a good day, she laughed. That's still possible, isn't it? He turned and smiled at her. She looked young and happy on the board, the way she had looked when they had been dating. The worry lines on her face were no longer visible, and he couldn't help but take in the curves her bathing suit made noticeable. Anything's possible, he replied. He winked, forgetting she wouldn't see it through his sunglasses. Let's keep going, she suggested. I think the workout will do us both some good. Your wish is my command, he said, and he meant it. Giving her a happy day was the least he could do. Despite the waves from the boats rocking his board, Brett had been able to peer over his shoulder to check on Cara periodically. She had been wearing a bright pink shirt with a graphic of a dolphin that looked like it was composed of stained glass. She also had the extended brim hat that made her easy to spot, even peripherally. He could no longer see her. And I'm going to end there.
No, we all agree. Brett should be the one that gets eaten, not her. Come on. Just please go rewrite that for me. Thanks. Our fourth reader is F. Deal. F. Deal's short fiction has been published in numerous online zines and anthologies, as well as in F and SF. She is assistant fiction editor at Abyss and Apex. Her first novel, Esprit de Corps, is the first in a steampunk paranormal romance series involving the twins of Belfay. For Strong Women, she edits the Zoom recordings into videos for our YouTube channel and for individual authors to post on websites or blogs. Take it away, F.
Thank you, Kate. You are wonderful. A year ago, I read from chapter 1 of this novel, and at that time, Jacqueline Duval discovered that there was this automaton who had gone rogue, and inside the automaton was a skull with mysterious writing on it. So Jacqueline takes herself to Paris to see if she can solve the mystery of this mysterious skull and what it could possibly be used for. Those of you who know your French literature, you're going to have a ball with all the Easter eggs. So Jacqueline is heading down the boulevard, and walking toward her, oblivious to the gawkers around him, was Angélique, her sister's best friend, Charles, an aspiring poet, if Jacqueline recalled correctly, a slender fellow with a dandy sense of fashion, disheveled black hair, and a full beard and mustache. He staggered down the boulevard covered in happy yellow mud, obviously drunk, still, already, and juggling 3 skulls. Jacqueline ran to intercept him. Charles! He stopped, and the skulls clattered to the pavement. What in the world are you doing with these? Charles hiccuped as he bent down to gather them up and began juggling them again. I thought it was obvious. He tossed one to her, chuckling. Death, while in life, should be no less a part of it. She examined the skull, but it was unmarked. I mean, how do you come to have these skulls? Where should they be? Surely your delight in the empire of the dead doesn't extend to grave robbing. He leaned a hand against her shoulder, grinning into her face. You wound me, Mademoiselle Jackie, but I forgive you, for I am in love, and when I am in love, no one goes unforgiven. He took back the skull. No, I found these upon the ground near a slight aperture that most likely leads to the developing ossuary below us, to speak of the empire of the dead, the catacombs. But they're closed to the public, she said. He set a finger to his lips, which is not to say how these 3 escaped. Jacqueline drew a sharp breath. Skulls from the catacombs? 6 million skulls at least, enough to power an entire army of automatons. Charles, can you show me this aperture? He drew himself up, wiped a finger across his mustache, sniffed, and burped. I'm not sure. I can try to retrace my steps once I remember last I drank. Jacqueline snatched his lapels and shook him. I need you to remember. Easy, easy, he brushed her off. I do remember. There was a dead crow in the road near the Taureau Noir. Up this way then, she headed north, dragging him with her. Yes, a dead crow, legs in the air like a whore. But pulsing with life, don't you know, full of maggots. I think it was crushed by a cart. It looked like it was breathing, the way maggots swarmed within, pulsing and writhing. The irony upon irony quite fascinated me. A carrion bird, itself carrion. Dead, but appearing to be full of life, much like this city. Modernité, my dear Jackie, life goes on not despite, but because of the rot. Jacqueline wagged her head. You are one morbid soul, Charles. I'm not the one looking to climb down into the empire of the dead. He pointed to a street lamp, swayed that side with emotion. You're gonna need a light. Yes, she agreed. Probably more than just a candle or two. I'll work that out. He turned her off the boulevard to a side street and then a narrow, closed alley. Here, he announced with dramatic flourish, le derrière d'enfer. The buckled pavement had tilted up and separated from the street. Where they had once met, a long opening had caved inward, just wide enough to let a slender body pass. Jacqueline stooped to examine it and found the yellow earth worn smooth. Someone comes through here regularly. It must be fairly usable then. She stood and wiped her gloves. I'm almost willing to hazard there are candles and lanterns stowed just inside the entrance, but I won't wager my life. She went back to the boulevard to get her bearings and pointed west. Rue Saint-Georges it is. Charles held back and bowed. Not I. I have a rendezvous to keep with my beloved. I wish you good fortune on your hunt, Jackie. She hurried back to kiss him and kissed him on the cheek. You have been an invaluable help to me, Charles. Thank you. He blushed furiously, but grinned as he saluted and walked away. He began to whistle, indulging in the shocked glares of the passers-by. Jacqueline headed back to the Barrière d'Enfer and hailed a fiacre to Rue Saint-Georges, number 10. No more than a rundown barn, the temporary home of Adolphe Sax's musical instrument factory. Fortunately for her, due to the current conditions of his workshop, Sax was willing to interrupt his work on his various horns to cast brass tubing and sheets for her to bring in extra funds, hoping to soon buy himself a real foundry. As she moved through the factory, she could hear Sax on the far side, engaged in a lively discussion with an older man. They broke off as Jacqueline approached. Duval, Sax greeted. Meet Hector Berlioz, Jacqueline Duval. Berlioz kissed her hand perfunctorily and then finished his conversation. In any case, do not be surprised by commissions from Germany as I complete my tour. Will you be able to handle them all? Sax waved. Of course, absolutely. By November, I'll own half this block. I'm sure of it. Good. Berlioz shook his hand enthusiastically. Until my return, then, my friend. He strode out of the factory while Jacqueline shook her head. Sax, you know you can't. Sax stopped her. You have no idea what I can and cannot do. She smiled. I know you're broke. She reached into the inner pocket of her coat and brought out a wad of francs, which she pressed into his hand. I hope this helps. Every sou, each écu, he replied with a grin. Where shall I deliver the order? She gave him the address. One more thing, if I may, Sax. I need a lantern. A musler, if possible. Do you have one to lend? He wagged his head, chuckling at her. You are the strangest woman indeed, Madame Duval. But he did indeed have a safety lantern for her when she came away satisfied. More so because she had managed to leave his shop before he started playing some new incarnation of the saxophone for her, a sound somewhere between a throttled goat and a bloated cow. She much preferred his flugelhorn. And that's where I will end. Hope you liked it. And the book is going to be available April 1st. You can pre-order on Amazon, and or you can write to me and give it away. And speaking of giveaways, I will give away an electronic copy to one lucky person.
I love the count. That was me in high school. A lot of the instruments I played. So pretty sure that's where you got that from. But that was so fun.
Adolf Sachs, first of all, he was dropped on his head as a baby. He fell down a flight of stairs. He fell into sulfuric acid. There were so many accidents of his childhood that I think that fully explains the saxophone. That's all I can say.
Oh, love it. All right, our fifth reader is Elaine Isaak, the second Elaine of the day. Elaine Isaak writes adventure fiction inspired by subjects like medieval surgery, ancient clockworks, and Byzantine mechanical wonders. Published works include Drakemaster, the Dark Apostle series, the Bone Guard archaeological thrillers, and Skystrike, Wings of Justice. Her latest release is a young adult science fiction novel, A Wreck of Dragons. For Strong Women's Strange Worlds, Elaine boots Sarah out of the spotlight to MC the Friday Quick Reads. Take it away, Elaine.
Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you for taking over today so that I can be one of the readers.
Anything for you.
Aw. This book follows a team of 5 teenagers scouting for a new home for humanity in space with their giant robot companions, who are all named after famous explorers. Johari is partnered with a robot called Norgay, Talui with Armstrong. Maya's bot Earhart is down for repairs, so she is riding along with Johari inside of Norgay. They've just started exploring a new planet. Armstrong's beacon alerted to their proximity, and Norgay veered inland, sliding carefully out of the flocks of creatures into a cove where the vegetation parted in a series of large, round bowls, maybe where trees had fallen. Johari's window overlaid the image of Armstrong, outlined in blue to indicate that he still moved in reflective mode. Even as they slowed their approach, Armstrong rotated in the air, and his stabilizers drew back as his arms separated. The smooth shell of his flying exterior crinkled and folded to reveal joints. Waist, hips, knees separating from the whole. Huge silvery feet hovering as gently as butterflies. Armstrong's hands flexed through a series of movements. Fingers longer than Johari extruded a variety of tools ranging from chisels and bolt drivers to guns, nets, and suction tubes. The opaque window at his chest concealed Talui's compartment, the habitat office and control room, as if Talui were Armstrong's living heart. "Awesome," he said. "Let's go." Armstrong's careful jets and repulsors leveled his feet to the ground over a patch of stone, and he sat down with a little puff of dust. Maya cheered and clapped. Their previous planetfall, that methane swamp inhabited by water striders as big as toddlers, hadn't been nearly as pleasant. Johari grinned. What would he name the world? They had a list of themes proposed by Fleet Command and suggestions from the colony itself, probably millions of them by now. But in the end, it would be up to him, regardless of whether they stayed. The thought gave him a little chill. Stay, on a planet bound by gravity you couldn't turn off, surrounded by people you didn't even know. The list of names from Fleet included words like freedom, unity, and prosperity. The suggestions from regular citizens were stuff like New Earth, happiness, and simply home. Johari settled back into his seat, and Norgay swelled a little around him, cradling him, as he always had, the only definition of home Johari had ever known. Wow! Maya leaned forward, and Norgay obligingly stretched out her chair so that she could press her palms to the view. Her breath made little clouds against the window. Beyond, Armstrong's various tools collected bits of foliage, soil samples, a cloud of some tiny creatures, insects, or what passed for insects around here. Over the rounded pits hung immense blossoms in dripping rings of yellow and red, with lolling fronds around their stems. Armstrong's cameras beamed close-up images of the fronds where streams of liquid pumped along and little things swam inside. As Johari watched, a larger worm-like entity detached from the inner wall and slurped a mouthful of smaller creatures, then glided downstream and burrowed against the wall again. A whole ecosystem in a single plant. Freaky. Armstrong moved carefully forward, a serene statue in a garden of wonders. He leaned down and reached into the nearest pit, then adjusted his position and leaned further, almost precarious now, sending one of his suction tools toward the pile of stones. What does he want with that? Maya said. Bacteria, probably, or lichen, or maybe Chantel asked him to bring her one for chemical analysis. The suction tool rose slowly, the barely captured thing wobbling on its end. A second suction tool tried to assist, but overcompensated. With a tearing sound, the thing broke open, and the unmistakable goop of an egg spilled out onto the ground. Gross. Maya flinched back from the window. Talloway, what are you doing? Johari tapped and magnified. A thicker blob lay amid the murky pool. The egg had been fertilized. Gross indeed. The crazy flowers swayed and arched backward in slow motion. Sensitive plants. Cool. We need to gather one. I suspected they were eggs. If the proteins check out, the eggs could be used to recharge our kitchen pots. From the air, the pattern of these bowls reminded me of fish nests, but above ground. Yeah, dragons' nests. Maya nibbled on a fingernail. Dragons? Johari protested. Giant flying reptiles? What would you call them? We think they may be amphibious, actually, Talloway offered. I'm going to try again. Negative. Check your position. Armstrong's going to fall in there and get egg all over. 1 or 2 samples for testing is fine, but we didn't come here to wreck the place. Armstrong straightened and turned from the waist, scanning the pits all around them. Most were empty. In those that contained eggs, the eggs clustered close in the middle. Johari pictured the baiting wings of those, okay, fine, dragons, as it tended its nest. They would need that kind of span between the egg caches. You got a point, said Talloway. I'm going EVA. No way. We're not close to ready for that. We need more samples, a broader range, comparative analysis. You can't just... Talloway's face appeared in the center of Norgay's view window, his expression direct. We don't have time for that, Talloway said. The atmosphere test's fine. It won't take long. 1 egg, and I'm back. He flashed a grin, and then vanished. Armstrong squatted near the pit and extended one arm, swiveled at the shoulder to reveal a staircase. The atmosphere is one thing. We don't even know if the suit's filters can handle the local pollen and spores. Talloway! No answer. Johari sagged in his chair. We want to hurry, right? Maya asked. I mean, if fleet is starting to break down? That doesn't mean we want to rush and screw this up. The only other time Scouts okayed a planet for colonization, they overlooked a few tests, and the colony got destroyed. His parents had been there. Johari barely had escaped with his life, the only survivor. In the view before him, a hatch opened where Armstrong's ear would be, and Talloway stepped through, wearing a slick EVA suit. At least he was wearing a helmet, in spite of the encouraging atmospheric testing. Talloway descended the stairs from Armstrong's shoulder and made his way down the slope into the broad, round pit. A pile of eggs as high as his waist stood as high as his waist, the eggs themselves double the size of his head. At the perimeter, the flowers stretched upward. Johari stood up straighter. Something's happening, Talloway. Come back. Those flowers? One of the nearest gave a sudden burst, spewing greenish liquid across the pit. It spattered Talloway, knocking him sideways. He flailed his arms, righted himself, and the sound of laughter came through the comm. You thought the egg was gross. You had no idea. He reached a hand up and swiped gunk away from his faceplate. Then he gave a shudder. The liquid still contained the organisms Johari had noticed earlier. Now the smaller ones crept over the surface of Talloway's suit, and the larger ones, the predators, wriggled toward his joints. Shit. Armstrong, Norgay, we got to get that stuff off of him. Talloway spun about, stumbling back toward the slope, his movements jerky as he kept pausing to slap away the creatures. Armstrong's left arm pivoted and bent at the elbow. A barrel emerged, and he blasted Talloway's suit with a fine etching powder designed to remove any foreign matter before re-entry. Norgay zoomed closer, shooting out a cable that latched to Talloway's suit and drew him up the slope. A shadow swept over the stone, and the flowers recoiled as huge wings rushed downward. So, A Wreck of Dragons is now available anywhere the books are sold. Thank you so much.
You can't stop right before the dragon comes. Come on, it's a dragon. It's a dragon. It's a
Oh,
dragon.
yes,
It's a dragon.
I
It's a dragon.
can. Ha 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 ha.
Our final reader of the day is Anne E.G. Nydam. Anne E.G. Nydam has written and illustrated books for all ages. She also makes relief block prints and writes short stories and poems celebrating the wonders of the world, both real and imaginary. She lives near Boston with the usual sorts of family and pets, including a pampered Venus flytrap. For Strong Women's Strange Worlds, she puts together author panels, makes graphics, runs the slides during events, maintains the website, and really just does a lot for us. I added that part in for you. Whenever you're ready, Anne.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to be reading from a high fantasy. So just trying to complete that little sum of everything that we try to provide you in our panels. When at last Svarnil stopped to rest, all was silent behind her except for the chirp of birds and the rustling of squirrels. The bandits must have given up on her. It did not occur to Svarnil to wonder why they had turned back from the chase so abruptly. She looked up through the leaf canopy until she found a break in the dappled greenery where she could see the sun to get her bearing. The sun was almost directly overhead. She also saw something which looked more promising. Farther ahead, a thin plume of white smoke dispersed lazily in the air. Svarnil made toward it at a brisk march. She thought, although she gave little enough thought to the matter, that the smoke must come from the hut of one of the harmless wood dwellers Polgudzi had mentioned. Since she was heading south, it must be the house of Ro and her daughters. Somehow the conviction that she would find Ro and her daughters ahead prevented Svarnil from wondering whether the smoke might just as well come from the camp of another band of robbers, or indeed from something worse. Believing only that finding the source of the smoke would allow her to rest and get directions, Svarnil hurried on, ever deeper into the ringwood, where the bandits were afraid to follow. Astiath had not found the dragon in the first place she looked, so she slept that night in the empty cave, and in the morning bent her power on discovering the location of the beast. Her locating spell pointed to the center of the ringwood, where the lords of the ringwood had held their court, and Astiath set out steadily through the forest to the site of the ancient palace. To watch one of the Kumaroon at any given moment, there would not seem to be anything unusual about their walking, yet somehow they cover distances more quickly than mortals. Somehow they find paths through obstacles. It is said that they walk as the crow flies, and more is meant by the phrase than simply the direction they take. In short, Astiath, having traveled somewhat farther through the ringwood than Svarnil, reached the southwest side of the central clearing just after the elf reached its northern side. Stepping out of the forest onto a slate-paved avenue, Astiath stopped still as one of the broken marble pillars bordering the trees. She felt a tingling of power in the air, a pulse of dry heat washing out of the crumble of palace before her. She knew the feeling to be the presence of a dragon, and a dragon aroused. She ran toward the cluster of broken buildings, sweeping in her urgency like the shadow of a wind-driven cloud. A sudden crackle of golden flame leapt up from a courtyard in front of her. The hard, bright sparks pricked the air, and white smoke mushroomed angrily above the jagged edge of wall. Svarnil came abruptly between the last trees, and her next step carried her between two marble pillars, one of them fallen on its side. The slate pavement felt strangely jarring under her feet, so long accustomed to a thick cushion of fallen leaves. Before her rose a cluster of elegant stone buildings, their high windows hanging empty beneath half-fallen roofs. Behind the block of ancient stonework rose the thread of white smoke. As she watched, a sharp puff knotted the thread, and at the same time, Svarnil felt as though she were being watched, as though a mind were searching for her, focusing on her. Without thinking at all now of whether the smoke came from the fire of woodsmen or bandits, Svarnil walked forward to find its source. The lord of the ringwood and all his court were long gone from their palace. That much was clear. Weeds stood in the cracks of the stone pavement. Ivy curtained the walls, veiling some of the gaps that grew there as the ancient blocks fell away from their places. Windows opened onto the blue sky or onto black, empty spaces where slate roofs still held out the sun. The sun was hot, Svarnil suddenly realized, and although it was overhead, it beat on her face, pulsing on her cheeks until she felt them flushing to her heartbeat. Even when she walked under archways where ferns curled out of the joints and moss hid in the corners, the dry heat beat on her, and the smooth-worn walls were dry and warm to her fingertips. As she reached inner courtyards, a few of the windows held leaded diamonds of glass in their corners, while in others the lead alone remained, twisted and drooping. A gray thrush, the color of the slate still left on the turrets, fluttered onto a broken stub of railing where a balcony had been and began its long, liquid song. Over all the abandoned palace moved the watchful consciousness, and Svarnil felt it staring into her mind, probing at her motives for entering the ringwood. But her only motive was to find the fire from which rose the smoke, and as she looked up again, she saw that it was nearly overhead, spinning up less lazily from just the other side of the three-story palace wing she faced. She stepped into the archway. At that moment, many things happened at once, and all of them in a flick of time so brief that anyone watching from a distance might have missed it while blinking. But for Svarnil, time crouched motionless as a stalking wildcat, while a crackling sheet of yellow flame smashed against the wall just above the arch, and the sharp, bright sparks shot brittle as shattered glass off the blackened stone and pricked Svarnil's forearms, thrown up to shield her face. The billowing smoke was snorted aside to reveal the dragon. Nothing Svarnil had ever seen, no legend she had ever learned prepared her for the awesome size and power of such a creature, muscled in iron, mailed in gold, and impossibly huge. Heat radiated from the dragon's body, and light flashed from the shifting scales as the monster breathed. It was like standing before the sun itself, facing that golden, glowing warmth. The long head rose, and Svarnil remembered just too late that she must not look the dragon in the eyes. They were on her before she could turn away. She was pinned down by the three-cornered eyes, their shimmering golden sheen confusing inconceivable depths. Then the interrupted song of the thrush flowed on, and somehow the resumption of the passage of time only underscored the precarious tension of the meeting. It was a reminder that her fate still marched inexorably to meet her. The fire did not have to strike above the arch, thought Svarnil, lowering her arms, which were no shield against the dragon's piercing gaze. She was caught in that gaze, mesmerized by the shaded depths swimming below the golden sheen. Staring into the dragon's eyes was like looking down from a mountain peak with an eagle's vision, glimpsing distant details beneath shifting wisps of aureate cloud. She sank without struggle into the shimmering depths. And I'll stop there.
I'm telling you guys, it's really a problem when everybody just gets almost there and then you don't tell me the conclusion. But thank you so much to everyone who came today.